Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the 8th episode in our series, Divine Messages, a journey through the Qur'an. Let's dive into today's divine message. One day the Prophet ﷺ was sitting with a group of the leaders of the idolaters of Quraysh, and these were the movers and shakers in Mecca. And if he could convince them to accept Islam, chances were many others would follow suit. And this was a very important meeting for the Prophet ﷺ. And as they were fully engaged, a companion by the name of Abdullah ibn Maktoum approached the Prophet ﷺ to ask him a question. Now, Abdullah was a blind man, and he wasn't aware of the nature of the meeting that the Prophet ﷺ was engaged in and how important it was. When he asked the Prophet ﷺ his question, the Prophet ﷺ looked at him and frowned. Then he turned back to the group he had been meeting with, suggesting that he didn't want to be disturbed at this moment. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed very stark and descriptive verses rebuking the Prophet ﷺ in his response to Abdullah. Let's take a look at these verses. Allah says, "He frowned and turned his attention away, simply because the blind man came to him interrupting. You never know," meaning, O Prophet, "perhaps he may be purified, or he may be mindful, benefiting from the reminder. As for the one who is indifferent, you gave him your undivided attention, even though you are not to blame if he would not be purified," meaning the leaders of Quraysh and the idolaters. "But as for the one who came to you eager to learn," meaning Abdullah, "being in awe of Allah, you were inattentive to him." One of the most amazing things about this story is the fact that the Prophet ﷺ didn't utter a single word that was disrespectful to Abdullah. He didn't say anything negative to him. And given that Abdullah was a blind man, he would never have known that the Prophet ﷺ had frowned. Yet Allah made it a point to reveal verses announcing the mere facial expression that reflected the Prophet ﷺ's irritation at being interrupted, teaching us a valuable lesson regarding how we treat those who are vulnerable or have disabilities. When we think about vulnerable segments of the population, our minds quickly conjure up images of individuals with physical disabilities, perhaps a quadriplegic in a wheelchair, a visually impaired person using a white cane, a person with a speech impairment, an amputee. But there are many other segments of the population that are also vulnerable in their own unique ways. Orphans who are in need of love, children who require careful upbringing and support of their parents, the elderly who are dependent on their grown children, the ill who require medical care and moral support, the poor and needy who depend on the generosity of the community, immigrants and minorities who lack the social and safety networks and depend on the support provided by others. All of these and many others are in some respect vulnerable segments of the population, deserving of our care and attention. One of these groups about which the Prophet ﷺ spoke extensively are orphans. As we all know, he himself grew up as an orphan with his father dying a few months before his birth. His mother also died when he was still young at the age of 6. So he basically grew up without either of his parents around. The love and compassion he showed towards orphans was unparalleled. In one of his famous statements, he said, "I will be like this in paradise with the person who takes care of an orphan." And he raised his index and middle fingers to indicate how close. Allah further entices us to strive to serve the needs of orphans when he says, "And they ask you, O Prophet, concerning orphans. Say, improving their condition is best." In other words, the best thing you can do for an orphan is to uplift them and improve their situation in whatever capacity you can. At the same time, Allah warns us against taking advantage of those in need, such as orphans. He says, "Indeed, those who unjustly consume orphans' wealth, in fact, consume nothing but fire into their bellies, and they will be burned in a blazing fire." Our faith recognizes vulnerable segments in the community, seeking to raise their spirits and even giving them opportunities that are commensurate with their skills and abilities. During the time of the Prophet ﷺ, Abdullah ibn Maktoum, the same blind man mentioned earlier, was assigned the responsibility of calling the second adhan during Ramadan. So Bilal, may Allah be pleased with him, would call the first adhan, which would warn people that it would almost be time for Fajr, so they would know that they had a limited time to continue eating. And then Abdullah ibn Maktoum would call the second adhan, which would declare that it was time for Fajr and people could no longer eat. So in spite of his disability, he was not excluded. He was not excluded from society, and he was given a responsibility that he could carry out in spite of his disability. Our divine message today instructs us to be very careful in our dealings and interactions with vulnerable members of our community, to accord them the same respect and dignity we give to everyone else, to ensure their rights are not misappropriated, to guarantee their well-being and comfort is always prioritized, to compete to be at their service if we desire to earn the pleasure and reward of Allah. Today's divine message, وَلَا تَقْرَبُوا مَالَ الْيَتِيمِ إِلَّا بِالَّتِي هِيَ أَحْسَنُ, and do not come near the wealth of the orphan unless intending to enhance it.